So welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight, and today, as you can see, Gary Wayne is back, and our topic today will be, in general, secret societies. I mean, it's part of the title of Gary's book, and later on we will focus a little bit on the Rosicrucians. So, welcome back, Gary. How are you?
Very good, and thank you for inviting me back. And I think the topic today is sort of apropos, but then pretty much every time we get together, it's a good topic. So, but the thing is with secret societies is it's so complicated and there's so much misinformation out there, probably thrown out by the secret societies to keep people sort of off foot. And everybody's got a different theory in terms of which one of these groups that are the top groups, and it just is, they just keep going around in circles because it doesn't add up, or they try and put it into a pyramid model and it doesn't fit. So yeah, it's going to be a good discussion, and hopefully we can shed a little bit light on things and make it a little bit more organized and give you maybe a peek into, as best as we can, what a secret society does and what each of them sort of do. And not that say we're going to go through the whole list, because there's an endless list, but we'll go through some of the main ones.
Yeah, we will sit, if we were to do that, we'll be sitting here next year.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So
So that everybody is on the same page. How do you define a secret society? What is that?
well, I would just define it kind of this way, and then maybe I'll back into why I arrived at that sort of conclusion. It is a society that has a specific purpose. They all have a specific agenda, and they are an initiatory organization, and they have a specific, well, maybe specific isn't quite accurate, but if you look at sort of the Western secret societies, they have a Gnostic religion or a related religion, but there are secret societies all around the world. So you have secret societies in China, for example, that have been there all along, and they have equivalent societies that communicate with societies in the West. So they are built in the same kind of model, where you have adepts at the top that lead it, and then you have lesser ones at the lower level. What makes it sort of unique is that once you get by first level of adept, which is Freemasonry at the bottom, then you will start to understand why it gets so confusing, because only if you are a third degree York Rite or 33rd degree Scottish Rite do you know anything really about the secret societies and what their real agenda is. Everybody below that is taught stuff and they're prepared, but not all are invited to become adept or will earn their way to become an adept. So they are basically given pablum allegories and stuff like that, that is giving them some of the superficial stuff, but nothing at the core. So you can be a 32nd degree Scottish Rite and you still don't have the main secrets, but that's just part of the hierarchy, is that one organization. So they have a specific goal, they have a religion. They made their entrance into the world before the flood, as they take their own history back to. So the Western secret societies have a document, an oral tradition. It's now partially in written form, that they call a polychronicon. And that's their oral history that envelops aspects of the Bible as well. So they look at the Bible as a piece of it, but not the whole story, and not all of it is as what people think it is, because they think they consider it a fairy tale that has an allegorical meaning to it. You need to be an adept to understand the true meaning. It's part of the mysteries, right? So they're part of that polytheist mystery religion, and a knowledge cult, that they're providing the knowledge to the universe and everything as you go through some of these secret societies. So they begat before the flood. They begat before the creation of the giants, but giants and their bloodlines are very much at the core of the secret societies. They begin with the 7 sacred sciences that Enoch, son of Cain, puts into 7 disciplines, the knowledge that he learns from his father Cain, that he learned from Adam, according to the Polychronicon. And those are the same 7 liberal arts that people are educated in today. And they were designed to lead people away from God. They were designed to degrade God and dismiss God, and then to honor their pantheon, which is why polytheism is absolutely overflows in the imagery of science and education. It's like Greek gods, Roman gods. Gods from around the world are just sort of part of it. It's a degree system, so it's like in an initiatory organization at the low levels, as they're providing a little bit of what I would call superficial knowledge in terms of how they might view it, because you need to be in the secret societies to get at the real knowledge. So when these 7 sciences were created, they needed to protect this knowledge cult and protect that knowledge from the mundane. And so they created mystical religions, the mystery religions, and initiations and rituals and things like that. And then they developed the mystery schools to educate the elite, the bloodlines, the ones who held the upper class, not the small blacksmith entrepreneurial class or the slave class, which would have been typically mundane humans for the most part over the millennia, both before and after the flood. And so the mystery schools developed inside of them specific organizations that were developing specific lines of the knowledge and focusing on. So, like Masonry, for example, or Freemasonry considers the 5th science their sacred science, because geometry is that 5th one, and that's the key to Masonry. And so they all have a specific science that they sort of dedicate themselves to. But we won't, that's kind of a side issue. It's just sort of the understanding the environment of these secret societies. And so we even see that kind of tradition even today. Like you go to a university today and they have all of these initiatory organizations for the students, at least they do in North America. I mean, they all, and some of them in some of the Ivy League universities are specifically targeted at the elite of the bloodlines in North America. So the Skull and Bones would be one of those where that's just for the important bloodlines in the US. So that's kind of what a secret society is. And they all have, and there's many of them, and they all are working in a specific direction.
Mm-hmm. When you said that, let's say if you're not above the 33rd, if you have not reached the 33rd degree, you still don't know what is really going on.
Yeah.
Is that a little bit like in Freemasonry, the Blue Lodge system, Watch Masonry, where people think, yeah, it's about charity and spaghetti dinners?
Yeah, because it's only the adepts at the top that are working on the secret agenda, and below it's to give that superficial look. It's to give a look that does good things in the community, and that it does good things for business, that it's a good place to network, except that you have to be invited, even at the lowest level, Freemasonry level. And so they're dealing with bloodlines, like distant bloodlines and genes, or however they decide to tap whomever on the shoulder to join. So yes, they have this superficial look, and it sort of is an organizational structure that goes back into ancient ology. But as we understand it in the West today, this organizational structure is a template imported by the Knights Templar from the Assassins, who were part of the Sufism of Islam, so the mystical religion of Islam. And so they brought that organizational structure back. So the Knights Templar, which is the modern sort of real seed to all of the secret societies as we would understand them today were adepts at the top. So there were royal bloodlines who managed the top level. And, you know, the founding 9 and inside records say 11 of the knights weren't these poor monks. These were like the Anjou, the folk of Anjou. This is like one of the creme de la creme, using a French term for the Anjou bloodlines of Europe. And you and de Bouillon and de Payan on the Anjou, they all took their bloodlines back to their Merovingians. And the 2 Cistercian monks that were in there, they were relatives of these bloodlines, uncles and cousins of the ones that were in there, because it's the elite class from the bloodlines that dominate the priest class as well. It always has been part of that. So you would expect, if they're Cistercian, that they'd be Gnostic bulls, which they were, that were part of that organizational structure. And there's a family name in there that was a battle partner as part of the 11 versus the original 9, who was a battle partner of Hugh de Payan, which is Henry Sinclair, of the Sinclair, as we would understand it, for the creation of Freemasonry after the fall of the Templars. So yeah, this is a society that is right from the beginning has been dominated. So this was a transition of what they call ancient Masonry, which was just the royal organizations, the top bloodlines, that was now creating a larger organization that controlled the military, controlled a lot of the education, and controlled the banking as they progressed. And when they fell, they had to create a decentralized organization because the Templars were so powerful, it was hard to replace all of that. So they created a new system. And that's part of that organizational structure that we'll get to in a few minutes as we give you a new model versus the pyramid model to look at. It's not a new model, but for most people, it's a new model.
Yeah. So, yeah, and it is not true that the Templars disappeared.
No.
Yeah, because, yeah, of course, some were executed, that's correct, but a huge chunk went to Portugal, they went to Scotland.
Yeah, and the Knights Templar that were disbanded in 1307, they were the junior order. They were still adepts, but they were a junior order, and there was a senior order that were in control, and that's where the bloodline families work. So you see, as you see some of those Knights Templars as they are Grand Masters coming down the line, they aren't necessarily after, let's say, de Bouillon and the Baldwins and de Payan. They're not really part of that elite bloodline. They split into the higher order and the lower order, and some people would call the higher order the Priory of Sion. And the Priory of Sion, and I write about them and put them in my new book and give some historical references to where the name comes from, how we know they're real, and the references. So if you're reading, you know, William of Tyre and some of those ancient records, there's lots of records about this order of barons that elected the king of Jerusalem kings. Well, they split in 1188 at the Geezer's Castle in a ritual that they call the splitting of the elm, which is an important tree in polytheism. And what had happened in 1187 is the Knights Templar had lost Jerusalem. So the higher order was very upset that they had lost their focus. They were too focused on banking and other interests and political interests. And so they split away. And that's why they didn't help them. So if you see a history of the Priory of Sion grandmasters, it's in about 1188, because that's the splitting of the elms. That's when the senior order splits away. And that the grandmasters before that would have been represented by the grandmasters that were formed at the start of the Knights Templar. And then from there, you have several different had different organizations that had come together to create the Templars from the royal bloodline. So, and then with the Priory of Sion, you see a transition in the 14 and 1500s of the Grand Masters in that list, because something else is going on. Not only the large decentralization of the Knights Templar into the obvious organizations that we see today, but you see more organizations being added. And you see a separation from the top bloodlines to the lower organizations. So you start to see people like Da Vinci and Newton as being part of those Grand Masters. So they're still noble elite. They're just further out bloodlines. And so they're going to be called Rosicrucians, that we'll come back to, but they're now reporting up to family organizations. And this is the lower level as they expand that to better manage, I guess, the size of the organizations that they've created. So yeah, it's an interesting web, and what we need to understand is that whether or not it's the Illuminati, whether or not it is the Rothschilds, whether or not it's the Royal Society, whether or not it's the Rosicrucians, they are all created because of the destruction of the Knights Templar in 1307. So they're going to decentralize and put specific agendas into those modern organizations. So if we start to understand, it starts to make sense that why you can't do an organization that's done in pyramids, because you just can't get it to the top properly. There's too many organizations and you just can't continue to do it. You can do multiple ones, but it doesn't really sort of connect, right? So I would encourage people to look at it from how the secret societies organize things. And they do it with two kinds of trees. One is a elm tree or an oak tree. The allegories for both. And of course, that's connected biblically with like the oaks and the ashes of Mount Hermon. Oak, elm, ash being similar. The elm is the most holy tree, along with the oak in some segments. So like you have the Tuatha De Danann, the oak was the most holiest, and in a lot of traditions, it's also the elm tree. And they kind of considered them similar trees. But when they're putting together their genealogy of their bloodlines, there's a tree involved. And this hardwood tree that's got all these like umbrella tree look. So it's like an elm tree that they do their genealogies on. That's a thelemic tree. And it's what they call their trunk organizations. You have the trunk bloodline with all of these other branches that sort of branch out. Well, they also have another tree that organizes their secret societies and their Masonic royal societies. And so that's called like the cedar tree. It's an evergreen and it represents immortality, whereas the elm tree represents reincarnation because it sheds its leaves and it renews itself every year. But the evergreen tree never sheds. It's like immortal. It's like an allegory for it. And of course, cedar is part of those trees of Mount Hermon. Just as in Amos, it talks about the Amorites were like the oaks and the cedars of Mount Hermon and Bashan. It's all part of their allegory. So this is the thelemic evergreen cedar tree. And they were giant trees. So again, things represent giants and their bloodlines. It's just all sort of intermixed. And those roots go into their heaven, which is called Hades or Sheol or the other world, Anwin, whatever you want to call it by the different names around the world. And it is also understood, both of those trees would be understood as a world tree. And you see images of both as being the world tree that connects earth and heaven. But that's like the firmament as it's showing in those diagrams, where their power comes from the gods who live in the other world, right? That's where that power and authority stems from. So in the thelemic tree of the evergreen, imagine a tree that grows straight up like a large fir tree or a cedar tree. And then it has branches that sort of come down. And in the trunk are the thelemic trunk organizations. And thelemic, you can actually get that word is kind of borrowed biblically as it's used in the New Testament for the will of God. And in this ideology, it's the will of the gods in the other world, the authority, right? And Rabelais, which is one of the powerful authors in the Middle Ages that wrote in support of the Rosicrucians and creation of these societies, he uses that term thelemic tree. And I think it's also used in his books about the giants with Gargantua and all of those interesting stories that he was talking about in a rather weird alchemic kind of book. So you have these trunk organizations, and if you can imagine this tree trunk that has trunk organizations with Freemasonry at the bottom, the first level of adept, and then as you go up using the old third degree system as adept that comes out of the prehistory, if you're going to oversee lodges, whether it's in standard Freemasonry or what they call continental Jacobite exported Freemasonry that went to Europe, you have to be a fifth degree to be like a general or a regional manager, so to speak, of multiple lodges. And so on that degree, as you move up, is going to be where the Illuminati registers. And so the Illuminati, they were said to have merged with Freemasonry, and they live at that adept level. And then above the Illuminati is the Rosicrucians. So they're the apex of lower level Masonry. And above that, and 50% of the Rosicrucians are purebloods. The rest are the ones that sort of rise up from the bottom. So you have ones that are joining it from the top and ones that are rising through their education through the degrees from the bottom. Then you have the Committee of 300 at the top. You have the Council of 33 and then the 13 families. I just wanted to get that on the table before we moved on. So
when you say purebloods, does that mean they have a royal heritage, so-called royal?
Yes. Yeah, royal bloodlines. Roy is king, L is in God, as it's transliterated. Rex Deus, black nobility, royals, whatever you want to call them. Yes. So they populate the top levels of the secret society. So they work like puppeteers through those organizations from behind the scenes. And so.
And what makes them so sure that they are royal? Because they have a conflated bloodline between the devil and Jesus, or what's going on there?
They would call it a noble bloodline.
Because of what?
Because they would be adding more pure bloodlines into the mix, or important bloodlines. And then there's also,
but
let me finish.
Yeah.
But they also have to add in new blood, right? And they usually do that through the outer nobility class, distant bloodlines. Otherwise, they develop blood diseases, right? So there's a weakening of that disease. Now, we don't have to believe that they are actually royal. It's not important, but they believe it, and what they do with that is important. So they keep their own genealogies. Whether or not they're true or not, that's a whole different argument, but it's what they do with that belief system that's important.
Yeah. But where does that originally come from? Does that come from, we descended from the fallen angels, or whatever? What is going on in their minds?
Yes. So you have a godfather, so an angel patriarch, although there would be a matriarch in polytheism, as they would understand that as well. So some of the goddesses also produced offspring. For example, Gilgamesh is the offspring of Nin, or Ninsun in some of the translations, and the father was King Lugalbanda of Uruk. So you have a mix of that. So, and you also have a patriarch giant that they take them back to. So I'll give one example so that people sort of understand what we're talking about. You have King Charles III now, who is on record as saying he takes his bloodlines back to Vlad the Impaler. You can find that information rather easily. And he's a Hanover. His name's not Windsor. He's German bloodlines. And they changed the name to Windsor in World War I for obvious reasons, for propaganda reasons. And again, there's nothing wrong with German kings. It's just they're not the Windsors, they're the Hanovers. And their bloodlines were intersected through the Eastern bloodline intermarriages that would go back to Vlad the Impaler, whom Dracula is based on. Now, Vlad the Impaler was pale-skinned, hazel-eyed, red-haired, your typical Celt or Tuatha De Danann, or the Datanu as you take them back to the Ugaritic text. And he takes his bloodlines back to the Scythians of the Black Sea region, and then back to specifically, if I can remember the name of the tribe, the Asagari, or Asagri, I think it's pronounced. That's one of the tribes of Hercules, who is the son of Zeus. So you have the patriarch of Hercules, and you have the god, and that's a post-Diluvian genealogy. So that's just one. And so they would also take that angel back to Tamiel in that bloodline, which we would know through the book of Enoch as Kezidiah. Okay, so understand what again, whether or not that's true, I don't know. I only know what they profess and how they declare their divine right to rule. So that would be an example, and they track that, and they would track in those bloodlines when new ones are grafted in. So all of the royal houses have a coat of arms, and you'll see different sort of symbols on there, and in a heraldic sort of nature that would declare, as it was invented to, that if they met somebody in the open somewhere and they had not met, they would be flying their banner of their coat of arms, and the royale that would see it would understand exactly who they were in terms of that symbology. And those would take back, so that coat of arms are going to have those physical human-like genealogies as well as imagery of the gods. So you would have two unicorns on the Hanover coat of arms, for example, which would be thought of out of Germany versus the English one that has a lion and a unicorn, and same with the Sinclairs. It could be a double-headed Anunnaki in another bloodline, right? But in this case, it would be in their allegory that this would not be the horse that people refer it to. It would be an allegory for something that pulls the chariots of the gods, and the main ones, which would be a cherubim. So that's the allegory for that. So they would show that. But if there was a new bloodline that was grafted in, they would enter in some symbology representing that bloodline.
So what would you say during your research? What is the oldest secret society that is noticeable with, let's say, organizational structure, a secret oath, and what have you?
Well, from a Western perspective, we would recognize it as the Rosicrucians. But again, that's an extension of the Templars and the Red Cross Order, and them as being an inheritance of that Red Cross Order. So you would go back to the order of Constantine that was set up in the time that he took over Rome in 300 and reestablished the Red Cross Order. That is, the Templars become sort of a reincarnated order. So that Red Cross Order we also see reflected in Grail literature, and which predates the Templars, but it's just sort of imposing that longevity of that secret order within that literature. And again, it's all royal bloodline literature that are King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table and stuff like that. And then that organization in about 300, just after, say, about 320 or so, of the Order of the Red Cross and Constantine, is connected back through history into Israel as one line, but you can also take that back to the Ormus in Alexandria, which was a Gnostic organization that is also part of the formations of the Knights Templar. And I know it gets complicated, but so I'll just keep it simple and focused on the one line. They would take their organizations back to organizations of archmasons, royal archmasons that go back into Israel. So Judah and then back into Israel. So Jerubbaal would be one of their main sort of grand masters of that royal arch order of the Red Cross. And he would link back. See, he was part of the building of the Second Temple. They would take then that back to Solomon's Temple of the Royal Archmasons. And Jerubbaal was initiated, as that comes back downstream, by Darius into the Order of the East. And there's a whole bunch of other, but anyways, that's sort of the simple sort of genealogy of that Red Cross order. So Rosicrucians, who also have a lot of Egyptian connections in their imagery, they're what they call themselves after the splitting of the Elm in 1188. And so they're working invisibly, if we can sort of look at that. And what happens is in 1317, the Rosicrucian order is sort of officially, publicly, semi-publicly formed by Templar orders and royal families in Scotland. So some of the Templar order escapes to Scotland, and they get this visible organization that's called the Rosicrucian Order that Robert the Bruce organizes, even though you have this Rosicrucian Order acting sort of more invisibly before that period, but that's the first visible one. So after the fall of the Knights Templar, you have 33 family members that sit down with the Pope and they say, we would like to reinstall the Knights Templar into the Catholic Church. The Pope actually agrees, but he says, he turns the table and says, but I'm going to have my people running it. And they just say no. And then you have some bulls that are coming out against secret societies and stuff like that by the Catholic Church. And these 33 form this Rosicrucian order, which they've already been calling themselves. But as you see, as it evolves downstream, they're going to develop the Committee of 300 underneath and the Rosicrucians. And so when I talked about the Council of 33, that's the 33 at that time. And then you'd have the 13 families above. And so the Rosicrucians are active in 1400, shortly before and then afterwards, with bringing about the Sarkani Rond, or the Ordo Draconis, order to put their kings back on the throne in Central Europe that they feel there's been rival bloodlines come about. And so that's when we really start to see any sort of activity from them. And that's why their imagery is so similar to the Ordo Draconis, right? Including the Ouroboros, which is key to the Rosicrucians and to the Ordo Draconis as one example. And so this is the apex of what they call Freemasonry. And after that, you're going to have Illuminati formed, and you're also going to have Freemasonry formed. So Freemasonry comes into play in about the same period with the Knights Templar, and the Synclars are going to run it. But you have this higher order and this lower order, and then a little bit later on in the 1500s, you're going to have the Illuminati that's going to split, put another organization in there between the Rosicrucians and Freemasonry. So I'll let you back in with that.
Okay. And just out of curiosity, have you ever read the article, The Red Cross of Azazel?
No, I don't think I've read that article,
Yeah,
but it sounds like an interesting article.
Yeah, it's easy to find. You will find it on Script. Just type it in, the Red Cross of Azazel. It will come right up. And so he goes very detailed into the symbolism of the Red Cross, and that it is ultimately Azazel's symbol. Would that make sense to you?
Well, I know Azazel is sort of their grand patriarchal angel in Rosicrucian. He's right at the top, and Rosicrucians are into alchemy and chemistry as part of their um, combined sciences. And alchemy is the black magic of chem, as you sort of get that through the etymology of Egypt. And Azazel is the chem of Mendes. He's the goat of Mendes. So yeah, all of that would make sense. And as I noted, you have a Egyptian line that was forming into the Red Cross order that comes out of the Gnostics in Egypt that I mentioned earlier. Ormus would be the most formidable one that also has a connection back to ancient Zoroastrian as you trace that organization back. So yeah, that does not surprise me one bit. That is the one that they honor the most. And so you have in Roslin Castle in Scotland, built by another Sinclair as a monument to their religion and their secret societies and all of these really weird things that they've decorated it with. You have an angel upside down with a rope that's staying right in a form of a inverted S or Z, and that's and with the pearls as well that are, I think, broken in some of the images. So what's being represented there is Azazel, who's being punished in Orion, as they would place him, versus the abyss. And the pearls represent the pearls of wisdom because he's the individual that provided most of the illicit knowledge before the flood to the Nephilim and to the religions and to the secret societies. So yeah, he's very, very important to them.
Yeah. So yeah, I read that article. As I said, it's pretty detailed, and yeah, it made absolute sense to me. And funny enough, we see this Red Cross, it's plastered all over the place. Yeah, Switzerland has it on its flag. No surprises here. It's a Templar country.
Well, Switzerland has a white cross.
Yeah.
Right? Of the Knights of St. John, an organization that was created in the same sort of model, or at least reorganized into the same model. And many of the Knights Templars fled into the Hospitalitors and Teutonic Knights and Order of the Sepulchre and other orders around that would be Templar-like. And that in Switzerland, that's where most of the money went from the banking and the riches of the French organization. The Spanish and the Portuguese set up new Templar organizations to manage the Templar assets in those countries, but the biggest wealth was in Paris that went to Switzerland and into the Knights of St. John, and that's the start of the banking, right? That's the start of modern Switzerland banking. And I know the standard secular history is sometime in 17 or 1800s they start the banking. No, they started way back then. And the reason why Switzerland has the White Cross is because that was the basis for forming the nation that it was in terms of the money that was coming in and the presence of the Templars and the presence of the Knights of St. John. And when you have the Swiss mercenaries coming out of Switzerland, that's all Templars and Knights of St. John and descending sort of hidden organizations thereafter. And then they end up protecting the Pope. It's just absolutely bizarre so how things sort of work out. But so many of the popes were installed basically by the bloodlines to do their beckoning.
Yeah. And then you have the Red Cross organization, funny enough, connected to wars, and Azazel introduced weaponry here. So
Yeah.
I think so too. It makes perfect sense. So there's one thing that we hear time and again, and I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to how the bloodline families used Jewish people as the scapegoat, the court Jews, because up to this day, what you hear time and again, everything is the Jews' fault, and I have to say I'm not on board with that.
Yeah, they're part of the secret societies. I mean, you have mystical Judaism like Kabbalism,
Mm-hmm.
as one example. There's an Essenic form. There's several different forms of Jewish mysticism that is part of the overall mosaic of secret societies, the polytheist religion, and how they like to graft in, as you were alluding to, bloodlines from King Saul, bloodlines from King David, and bloodlines, as they would say, from Mary Magdalene and Jesus as part of that whole sort of mosaic. And so there's a fairly reasonable sized role that they play in, but they're not the dominant force. But they do play, a fairly large part. They're just part of all of that. And I would also sort of want to sort of introduce so that people have a better understanding is that you notice in that trunk organization that I talked about, I didn't talk about the Jewish organization in there because it's just sort of blended into it. And I also didn't mention the Jesuits in there that a lot of people also think is the dominant organization. And now I would like people to enter into their image of this giant cedar tree with the trunk organizations that has all of these different branches that funnel out. So wherever they intersect into the trunk organizations, that's who they report to. And that goes right around the tree. And again, along the branches as it descends down, lower organizations are onto the branch of the branch, lower, and a hierarchy that comes back, feeds back up into the trunk and feeds back down into the other world to their heaven, where their gods, they believe, live. And so it starts to give you a better understanding. So you have the Bilderbergers as an organization. Well, where would they fit in? I didn't put them in on the trunk tree. Or the Bohemian Society. I didn't put them in on the organization. Or the Club of Rome. It's why pyramid models just don't sort of fit. And I'm using their model. I mean, and so you would have, let's say for Freemasonry, you have very low level societies that are intersecting into them because they're low on that thelemic tree. So, they would send their members to the Lions Club or the Elks Club or all of these types of low level ones. And Freemasonry, as their agenda sort of fit, they would work into politics and the army. That's where they're focused. And so you see a lot of Masons in politics and you see a lot of Masons within the army. And next up on top is like the Illuminati. So you would have like the Skull of Bones, for example, as one that might be obvious to people. They would intersect into them. And all the other organizations that they're responsible for. And what the Illuminati was created to do is to be an organization wanting to dismantle Christianity. So you see a lot of Illuminati involved as moles in Christian churches, and you see Illuminati images in there. You have the Rosicrucians that are, specifically looking after the genealogies, the lost knowledge, and the religion. And so you would have, organizations that are intersecting into them. So you even have branch organizations that would intersect, that would be known as Rosicrucians. So like the Golden Dawn, for example, would be one of those branch organizations within the Rosicrucian organizational structure. So imagine those as they go up. So you would have like the Bilderbergers reporting into the Committee of 300. the Club of Rome into the Committee of 300, the Rothschilds into the Committee of 300. You would have the World Bank. They could be part of on a branch, or they could have their own branch, and the IMF and the Davos crew. They're connecting in at that level. And so it starts to make some sense. The Jesuits, because they're so populated by the black nobility, the Italian black nobility, Rex Deus, from the gens Julia for the most part, and the gens Claudia, as that goes back to the giants of Roman mythology and Romulus and Remus, and the plebeian bloodlines. They controlled a lot of the popes, as we talked about. So when they created the New Templars, when the Rosicrucians created the New Templars through Francis Borgia, bloodline of the Borgia popes, who funds Ignatius of Loyola, it gets him out of jail, and then sponsors them through his papal connections. And by the way, he's the Grand Master of the Montesa order, the order that inherited the Knights Templar treasures for the King of Spain to control. He sponsors them in the bull in about 1540 to create the Jesuits as the New Templars to control education and education for the most part, and then later banking, and how the banking aspect comes about. And understand the Templars were famous for their banking, is that in about 1527, the Bank of Rome collapses with the invasion of who? King of Spain. So they're bankrupting that, and they start to get control and Spanish influence over the Rome. And then by 1565, not Ignatius, but Ignatius is dead by that point in time, but in 1565, Francis Borgia becomes the third Grand Master of the Jesuits. And then by about 1570, 1572, Gregory the 13th, he grants the Jesuit orders the rights to Catholic banking, and then they move that, guess where? To Switzerland.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the Rothschilds, they were created from the Bauer family out of Germany, which was their original name. And in 1798, when they established the London Bank, they changed their name to the Rothschilds, the Red Shield, the Red Cross. It's the same type of imagery because to sort of cover up their Jewish sort of connections. And that's one of the reasons why the Jewish component is there, but they're intermarrying in to ennoble their bloodlines over the generations. But they were created to control the banking outside of the Catholic Church, right? And so you would have them, because of it's so central to the money aspect, they would connect into the Committee of 300. And they moved their banking eventually in not that long ago, I think in the last, say, 40 years or so from my memory, to Switzerland. So you have all the major banking controlled out of Switzerland. The Royal Society would answer into the Rosicrucians. I forgot to give an example of that. They were created by Freemasons and Rosicrucians, but what I said earlier, they control the knowledge, they control the history, they control the religion. And so the Royal Society was set up to control education and science outside of the church that the Jesuits were created to do inside the church, plus the banking, and outside the church it was the Rothschilds. So they've reset up the whole Knights Templar organization that's decentralized with specific agendas.
Yeah, I have to say, I find it really creepy how many, things lead back to Germany. I'm not saying Germany is the be all end all. No. But, there is a lot of stuff going on there with the Illuminati, with here, Mr. Rosenkreuz, allegedly.
Yeah.
And yeah, so many
Well,
things.
and the Illuminati, I mean, you're right. Let me just touch on that German aspect, is that, that Kaiser bloodline was very, very powerful and important. And through the wars, I mean, the Western Europeans were able to basically get rid of the Italian Anjou bloodline in favor of the French. They brought down the Habsburg Lorraine through World War II and World War I, the Kaiser bloodline, the Tsar bloodline in Russia, and they also launched social masonry, sponsored by the Rosicrucians again, who created social masonry into China and took down the Xiao bloodline, which Xi is a bloodline member of the Western branch.
G.
Xi.
Yeah.
Yeah, Xi is the short form of Xia. XI, XIA. XIA was the family of the complete Chinese dynasty, and the two most dominant names were Li, various forms of Li, and Xi.
Yeah, it's all one soup at
It
the
is.
end of the day.
It is,
And
and
now
it's that
it appears,
rivalry.
yeah, you know, and now it appears, and I'm not saying no, they are not here and they are working against each other. Of course, there is a rivalry, but when you peel it all down, it's all the same soup.
Yeah, it is. They're all working in the same direction. They just have disputes.
Yeah. Who is going
And
to be the head honcho?
yes, and we see a very large dispute on the geopolitical stage today between Xi and Putin, who also takes his bloodlines back to the Tsarine bloodlines, to the original bloodlines of Kiev, as he would take them back to.
Do you think that ultimately this conflict is about that taking back Kiev?
Yes, it's the most holy city. I mean, his great-grandfather or grandfather was born in Kiev. And in the tradition of the Putyatin bloodline, which is the original czars of the Uruk dynasty, if you had a child out of wedlock, they wouldn't get all the wealth and the privileges. They'd get some, they'd be well looked after, and they would get only a partial name. So the name Putin comes out of nowhere in about 1850. It has no historical connection throughout Russian history or Ukrainian history until about 1850, with this out of wedlock grandfather of Putin. And then in World War I, Putin's father moves to St. Petersburg, which is how he ends up in Russia. And so he really looks fondly on the dynastic nature of this Kievan Tsarist original empire, and that the Romanovs were a junior branch of the Putyatin starting in about 1600 through intermarriage. So the Romanovs take their bloodlines back there as their source bloodline. And that Vladimir the Great is part of this bloodline of the Putyatin that he emulates, and comes from what I would call a Masonic royal society, that is, I think it's the Bogatirs and the Bettinas as they're called, and they're obviously taking their bloodlines back to giants, and they take their genealogies through that way. And so, yeah, Vladimir the Great Vladimir is also kind of a kingly name or a title as it comes down through Russian history. So he takes his bloodlines that he believes to be back there, and he wants to have his Anunnaki, because he has got the double Anunnaki as part of his emblem of Russia that he's promoting as well. He wants to have Kiev as his holy ancient city. So he may destroy a lot of the Ukraine. I don't think he'll destroy Kiev, but he will not stop until he gets his holy city, because he's just driven by that. And he's looking for a larger role than the Western European bloodlines would like him to have. And Xi is saying the same thing. I have, my bloodlines back to the dynasty you destroyed, like you did Vladimir's bloodline. And you might see sometime down the road, maybe through need, you might see the Kaiser bloodline resurface in Germany and be part of the Eastern Alliance because of the need of energy. I'm not a prophet. I just sort of look at things and say, who are the ones that the Western Europeans took out, and where are they likely to be part of? I would see an economic group split in Europe. One will be Eastern and Central, and one will be the Western group. And I think by need, you'll see that be part of the Eastern Alliance that we see starting to be set up. And you already see big moves on India towards that alliance.
Yeah, exactly. How does Mr. Biden fit in there? Does he have bloodline roots
No,
as well?
no. Um, I would say best case scenario, he's a useful idiot. And it just shows you the power they have that they could put him in, right? And he is just being utilized as a European attack dog to do the beckoning of the Western bloodlines. And they'll bankrupt the US to do it, and then they'll just fold that into however they see these 10 groups of nations that they want to bring about. Trouble is what the Europeans is they're not going to dominate it in the model that they think. They may dominate a Western alliance, but they're not going to dominate the 10 groups. It'll be like Daniel's prophecy in Daniel 2 with the giant metallic statue with the two legs being the two halves of the original Roman Empire, and the end time empire is 10 kings, which is the 10 toes. One's on one side, one's on the other side. So look for a religion to be part of this Eastern Alliance. I know Putin is working hard with the Eastern Orthodox Church to prop that up as his, but I would see something a little bit different, because Vladimir and his Russian empire he wants is going to be a junior partner to the Chinese. Whatever they decide to go with their religion will be the dominant church, or with what they do with India as that dominant church. And I see something like Taoism or Taoism sort of coming back, which is an offshoot of Hinduism, and Buddhism is an offshoot of Hinduism as well. I would see that sort of coming back together. But that would still be the ancient religion of the czars. It's just that they may fold that into the Eastern Orthodox Church as well. So you might see Turkey as part of that central alliance as well.
So yeah, Gary, believe it or not, our first hour is already gone.
Wow.
And but wow, that was so compressed, and it is a lot of to process. And I am pretty sure I will have to listen to this several times.
Yes.
So yeah, in the following hour, we are going to dive deeper into the Egyptian symbolism, and especially with the Rosicrucians, mystery schools, and Akhenaton. I guess he is also playing a vital role here. So
He's all
yeah,
part of the
thank
mix.
you.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you so much for this first hour, and we see the patrons on the other side.